In 1943, the Marines of the Third Defense Battalion were destined for Masterton, a small town in rural New Zealand. They were arriving for some much-needed R&R in the heart of the Wairarapa Valley. Described as nice young boys by the people of Masterton, the Marines livened up a town that had been darkened by years of war. 80 years later, the memory of the Marines had faded, and few locals knew or remembered that they had called Masterton home.
So I've lived here most of my life and I never knew the Marines were here and we never learnt it in school.
Hey Hazel, did you know that Marines used to stay here during the war? No, I had no idea they used to stay here either.
In 2020, a chance inquiry from a member of the public piqued the interest of Masterton historian Mark Pacey. And over the next 5 years, he researched and revealed the long-forgotten story of these Marines. Mark dedicated himself to making sure the memory of these young Americans would be concreted into Masterton's landscape so that they would never be forgotten again. So you're a New Zealander with no American family. How did you come to devote so much time and effort to the Marines?
It all started in early 2020 when a developer came into the archive. Said, we've got this piece of land on the other side of the showgrounds. We're going to be developing it. We want to know a little bit about the history of it before we do that. I said, leave it with me. Found out that the United States Marine Corps had camped there in 1943. Now, this is quite fascinating. I studied military history at university and was immediately hooked and wanted to find out more, and it just went from there. I was visiting the site in early 2020 Found a few things, not a lot, but a few things, including a bunch of bullets. And I don't know anything really about ammunition. So I went and saw my friend Brooke in Featherston, and hopefully he could tell me what some of these things were. Were they American? Was there a connection with them to the Marines that were there?
Yeah, so this is a 30-06 round, or otherwise known as a 30 caliber M2 round. It has not been fired, and the firearm that would be traditionally used would be something like a Garand, any number of American firearms, which would be period correct for Marines and World War II. Yeah, so this is a 50 caliber round, also apparently found at the same site. This is consistent with the standard American heavy machine gun used at the time. So this round here, in all probability, is a 230 grain 45 round. Now, this would be commonly used in the 1911 A1 pistol, which was American World War II standard issue sidearm. So yeah, this is in all likelihood based on the dimensions that I'm seeing here and the bullet weight that I've already measured.
I knew about the Marines being in Masterton because, as the story goes, my great-grandfather bought a house cheap on Colombo Road because it had been used as a billet for the Marines when they were here, and they hadn't exactly left it in the tidiest of conditions. I was also told about the Marines being here from my grandparents. To do the research, I started with the Masterton Library and was pointed in the direction of a few books, but I realised there's not a huge amount. I had a look in the Wairarapa archive where I work to see whether any records had been deposited over the years relating to the Marines being in Masterton, and there were a few records, which was really, really good, including the absolute jewel find, which was an oral history recording with Wayne Harter. For some of the more detail around the camp, I had to go down to Wellington and into the National Archives and see some of the records that they had there. I also had a look through the old newspapers at the time, and these were on microfilm, so it meant going through page by page, trying to find any instances where the Marines were mentioned in the Masterton paper. Between all of those things, I was able to put it all together and tell the story from the beginning to the end of the Third Defense Battalion stay in Masterton. After 3 years of work, I actually produced a book, and the book was launched on the 17th of February 2023, 80 years to the day that the Third Defense Battalion got off the train in Masterton.
So what was going on in the world around the time the Marines came to Masterton?
The world was in a very, very dark place in February of 1943. The European War had started in 1939, September of 1939. The Pacific War had started in December of 1941. So by February of 43, the world had been, trying to kill itself for a very, very long time.
The Prime Minister, Mr. Chamberlain, in a broadcast speech tonight, proclaimed Britain at war with Germany. Mr. Chamberlain said up to the last it would have been quite possible to arrange a peaceful and honourable settlement with Germany, but Herr Hitler would not have it.
New Zealand was part of the British Empire and was quick to join Britain in the war. And New Zealand Prime Minister Michael Joseph Savage then had to go out and tell the people of New Zealand that, unfortunately, 20 years after the last big war, here we are in the same sort of situation. We're going to war again.
Both with gratitude for the past and confidence in the future, we range ourselves without fear beside Britain. Where she goes, we go. Where she stands, we stand. We are only a small and young nation, but we are one and all a band of brothers. And we march forward with union of hearts and wills to a common destiny.
While I was savvy with the Pacific War, I wasn't anywhere near as clued up on the history of the European War, especially New Zealand's involvement. And I wanted to know more about what was going on in New Zealand at the time. I thought, well, the best way to do this is go and find an expert. So I went down to Wellington and saw my friend Peter and got him to put it down to simple terms. You know, what were the first couple of years leading up to Pearl Harbor like for New Zealand in the European theatre of the war?
New Zealand decided to enter the Second World War on its own volition. It didn't have to, unlike the First World War, where it basically followed Britain in as a dutiful daughter of the empire. In the Second World War, it had the ability to not do that, but the mores were that it enter the war and support Britain. So having got the echelons to the Northern Hemisphere, this business of Italy entering the war also produced a problem, because the second echelon was heading for Egypt to go up the Red Sea. And of course, Italy had a naval base on the Red Sea, so they couldn't go through there. So the second echelon was diverted south of South Africa up the Atlantic and languished in Britain for several months before they could then be transferred early in 1941 to Middle East. And it was only in about March 1941 that the New Zealand division actually came together as a fighting unit and were able to train together as a division. One of their first tasks was to be sent off to Greece, where the Axis forces, Italy and Germany, had invaded and were pushing down from the north. So New Zealand, with an Australian division and a few other hurried assembled troops, were quickly sent there to defend the Germans and Italian advance. And it was a fighting retreat more or less the way down, and they were evacuated off beaches on the southern coast of Greece. Loss of a lot of men, particularly in prisoners of war. And of course, they then were taken to Crete. And they said, if we can't hold Greece, we'll try and hold Crete, which was a very strategic island on the eastern end of the Mediterranean, commanded the Suez Canal and other features near Malta. So a very strategic island. And again, the German invasion there on the 20th of May 1941 was overwhelming, and perhaps we defended the airfields a bit too much or not enough, because Freiburg was also fearing a seaborne invasion, and that turned to Custer when we had to again evacuate over the hills, the mountain spine of Crete. I've walked those tracks down to the south coast and jump on ships, and again large numbers went into the bag, were captured in Crete. So the division ended up back at North Africa and was able to rally itself enough for the Operation Crusader campaign in November 1941, where we tried to relieve Tobruk. But again, that was a very, very tough battle, and we had significant losses there.
Now, with the United States involvement in the Pacific Theatre, it goes back before the war started. Now, the Marines and the Americans, they were very, very clued up on what the war was going to be like. They knew that this potential new war was going to be nothing like World War I. It was going to be dominated by air power. And the Marines, the first to fight, they would be going into the Pacific Theatre, into all the islands, fighting the Japanese, and they would be under air attack. They needed air defense, so they created these defense battalions. Now, they did their training in Paris Island, and the Third Defense Battalion was created in 1939. They then went on to Pearl Harbor, did a bit more training there. They were then sent to Midway Atoll. This is before war was declared, and they helped reinforce that island. Then they went back to Pearl Harbor just in time for December 7, 1941.
While waiting for colors, a flight of strange-looking planes was observed approaching from the south. The planes were first assumed to be our own Navy planes coming in to land at Ford Island. In their approach to the harbor, the planes passed near the Marine base, dropping to a low altitude before making runs aimed at ships in the harbor. As they began to drop out of formation to begin their runs, the red ball insignia on the wings were clearly visible, and the Marines instinctively knew that Pearl Harbor was under attack by Japanese planes and that we were at war. This feeling was reinforced when explosions were heard and smoke began filling the sky in the vicinity of Battleship Row, 1010 Dock, the dry dock area, and Ford Island. Men were immediately organized into teams and began to break out small arms ammunition and machine guns from the battalion storerooms. Teams were quickly organized for firefighting, while other riflemen were distributed around the parade field in groups of about 16 to deliver coordinated and concentrated fire on attacking planes. Within 6 minutes after the attack started, 8 anti-aircraft machine guns were set up by battalion gun crews and began firing, and within 1/2 hour after the start of the attack, 13 machine guns were in action. This number climbed to 25 before the attack was over. Third Defense guns were credited with shooting down 3 enemy planes during the course of the attack.
For as the dawn broke this morning, at places as far apart as Honolulu, Nauru, Ocean Island, Guam, Singapore, and British Malaya, guns from Japanese warships, bombs from Japanese aircraft, shots from Japanese military forces struck death to United States citizens and members of its defense forces. To the peaceful subjects of Great Britain and her men on ships and on the land, the Pacific Ocean was reddened with the blood of Japanese victims. These wanton killings will be followed by attacks on the Netherlands East Indies, on the Commonwealth of Australia, on the Dominion of New Zealand, if Japan can get its brutal way.
In the first few months of 1942, the Japanese advanced and could not be stopped. They were just getting victory after victory after victory, so much so that the Emperor of Japan, Hirohito, said that the fruits of war are tumbling into our mouths almost too quickly. It was then that President Roosevelt made a statement that we were really, really relieved to hear.
I say this to you so that you may have every confidence that we are going to reinforce your position with all speed. Moreover, the operation in which the United States Navy has begun and have in view will constitute a protection to the coast of Australia and New Zealand.
Meanwhile, the 3rd Defense Battalion were on Pearl Harbor, where then a detachment of them was sent to Midway Atoll, and they were there when the Japanese attacked. This was the battle that changed the course of the Pacific War. The atoll itself was defended, it was never invaded, and the detachment of the 3rd Defense Battalion did their bit to help keep that safe. That detachment came back to Pearl Harbor. When they got there, they saw that there was a lot of activity going on. There was a lot of troops and ships there getting ready for a new campaign. They then joined the rest of their battalion and made their way to an island that no one had ever really heard of before, but for the rest of history, people would always know it.
The 3rd Defense Battalion logged over 130 enemy air attacks on Guadalcanal in the 6 months that it was there. As a result of anti-aircraft artillery and special weapons actions against the enemy, 49 enemy aircraft were shot down, with 13 probably shot down. A total of over 4,300 rounds of 90mm ammunition were expended.
You published a book on the Marines that were camped here. What made you decide to build a memorial as well?
I wanted to pay tribute to them in a more permanent way. It scares me, but the reality is not everybody reads books. Less people read books now than they used to. So I was meeting people a year after I'd done my book who were still telling me I had no idea the Marines were here. So I thought, well, let's do something permanent. Books don't last forever. Let's have something where they were camped that you can't miss, that people can stop, they can look, and they can learn who these guys were. Solway Showgrounds haven't changed all that much since the Americans were there. A lot of the buildings are still the same. But there's nothing there that is just definitively Marine Corps. And I thought, well, we've got to change that. We need something there to say that they were there. So I went onto the website for the showgrounds, went to the contact us, and I wrote them a small little message saying, this is who I am. I've done a book on the subject now. Let's put a plaque in there or something. I'll take care of everything. I'll design it. I'll pay for it. I'll install it. I'll do it all. We emailed back and forth a little bit. I also said I'm working on a documentary and I would love to incorporate all of it. They came back and said, board loves it. Go for it. My friend Alan had given me a book on Commonwealth graves and things, Commonwealth memorials, gave me some ideas, some really, really nice ones in there, bigger than I was originally planning. Now in our local park in Queen Elizabeth Park in Masterton, We have obviously the cenotaph for all of the wired upper soldiers, so this is our main one, our big one. We also have a very small plaque for Sir Herbert Hart by the aviary. That was what I originally planned, was have a small plaque. I thought, well, let's get something in between the two. Let's draw something a bit bigger, because I don't want people ignoring it or stepping over it. So I came up with this. This is my terrible original drawing. This is the next one, which is my terrible attempt at watercolour. I submitted this to the showgrounds people, and they came back and said, again, the board really likes it. Go ahead with the next step. So the next step was obviously doing a proper design, a proper working drawing, using my old-fashioned graphics and design skills that I'd learned in high school many, many years ago. I came up with some proper plans of how I was going to build this thing. Now, the original, when I came up with this, it ended up being quite big. It was close to 7 or 8 feet tall. So this is my working drawing here. I submitted this expecting them to go, oh, it's really nice, it's really ambitious, you're very artistic, but it's too big. Please tone it down a bit, make it smaller. But of course, they came back and said the board loves it, build it. So now I was faced with the idea, I was like, well, they love it, they want this. How am I going to build this thing? Am I going to be able to deliver?
Why did the Marines come to Masterton? Why were they sent here?
They were sent here originally for R&R. They had been on Guadalcanal for 6 months. It's truly a hellish place to be. Yeah, they were sick with malaria. There was a lack of supplies. The Japanese were extremely determined and refused to surrender. So they needed to basically get as far away from the conflict as possible, where they could recover so they could then go back into the Pacific again at full strength. For some of the Marines, they found out where they were going to be going, and the prospect of going to New Zealand, which is quite a way away from where the fighting was met with a lot of relief. Now, the Marines were excited about going to New Zealand, and one of them, Wayne Harter, decided to do his homework, and there were New Zealanders on Guadalcanal at the time, so he thought he would go and have a chat with them.
We didn't know we were coming to New Zealand because we were actually, before we left Guadalcanal, we were very close to the air base there. And there was a New Zealand contingent actually on Guadalcanal at this stage. I forget what they were flying now, but I shot across over there and got in touch with some of them. They gave me quite a few addresses all over the place and told me where we were coming. Not that I ever looked any of them up, of course, but I did get some addresses. And we did know we were coming to New Zealand.
Now, while Wayne was in reasonable health, so many of the others were suffering from fatigue and malaria, and their exit from the Solomon Islands really couldn't have come soon enough.
The tired and malaria-ridden Marines climbed up cargo nets with great difficulty and with considerably less vigor than when they had climbed down 6 months earlier. Some Marines were too sick and exhausted to make it to the top without help from other Marines who would boost them one rung at a time to the deck of the ship.
As the transports left, taking the exhausted battalion with them, the real horrors of the islands were not over. And unfortunately, tropical sickness has quite a long tail.
I had the 8 to 12 watch on the gun turret. These guns were on a pedestal mount inside an armor plate, 6-foot diameter cylinder about 5 feet high. I was standing with my crew and my back against the inside of the turret when I suddenly became weak and slid down into a crouch with my head hanging low. My crewmen knew I was sick. The officer of the day came around and wanted to know why this man was sleeping on watch, a court-martial offense. The men told him I was not asleep, but I was sick. I was immediately relieved of my duty and taken to the sick bay. I slept all the rest of the day and was diagnosed as having malaria. I went up on deck this morning and saw land on the starboard side. About an hour later, an island appeared off the port bow. It looked as if we were going into a port. We entered the harbor of Wellington, New Zealand, and tied up at a pier. We were close to the downtown area of the city. It was a beautiful city, with much of it built from the shoreline up into the surrounding hills. We were all catching colds and freezing in our khaki uniforms. It was not winter there because the seasons were all reversed from those at home. Because of its position in the southern hemisphere, Wellington being on the southern end of the North Island, it had a cooler climate than the other area around Auckland, about 400 miles away.
The Marines landed at Aotea Key in Wellington and were given the rundown of New Zealand. And a special guidebook had been produced to help make the Marine stay in New Zealand go as smoothly as possible and explain all the sorts of things that they would need to know about staying in our country.
We know you're here to do a job of work and that you want to get on with it. When you get liberty, we want to meet you and know you, and we want you to meet and know us. And not merely on the streets, but in our homes. You won't find subways, skyscrapers, or nightlife. You will find that when you break the crust, we're much like the folks back home. Haere mai, e te hokawhitu atu. Haria mai te whakaro, papatahi kia mate te hoariri, mo aku tonu atu.
The current rules for New Zealand are that all vehicles must be warranted and registered on our roads. The particular road rules that are really important are that we drive to the left. We have speed limits that vary across all of our roading networks, which can range from anywhere from 30k roadworks right through to a 100k open road limit. When you're coming up to an intersection, you must give way to your right, and you must indicate at least 3 seconds before you turn. Driving on New Zealand roads, you must drive to the conditions. A lot of our roads are tar sealed, but also a lot of them are gravel. So you must moderate your driving to suit the conditions. But remember, drive to the left because the last thing you want to do is have a crash on New Zealand roads.
Intoxicating liquor, including all spirits, wine, beer, ale and stout, may have been sold only in licensed hotels, and then only during the hours from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. On Monday to Friday inclusive, and from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. and 4 p.m. to 6 p.m. on Saturdays. Intoxicating liquors may not be sold to persons under 21 years of age. New Zealanders have been well trained by your movies, but as we don't export films to Hollywood, you won't know ours. We share ours with Australia, though we do have a little of our own. Some of our language also is just as ordinary English, which varies from yours. Here are a few specimens.
Ooh, biscuits.
Biscuit equals cookie. Paul was excited about his jar of cookie.
How about that try the Hurricanes scored the other day? Wasn't that a corker?
Corker equals very good. Gary thought the try by the Hurricanes rugby team was very good.
This looks Jakealoo.
Jakealoo equals good. Kate thought that Our New Zealand Home was a good book.
I'm eating my lollies. Don't eat too many lollies, you'll get crook.
Crook equals ill. Lollies equals candy. Jordan felt ill because he ate too much candy.
Look, it can't be that heavy. Just pass it here. Oh, that's Narkta's day.
Narked equals ruined. Due to a box accident, Ken's day was ruined.
Hey guys, do you want to go get some fried chicken? My shout.
Shout equals to buy something. Jenny was offering to buy fried chicken for everyone.
Jenny fried chicken, what a skite.
Skite equals to brag. Deborah thought Jenny was bragging about buying fried chicken for everyone.
Oh, who's pinched my stapler?
Pinch equals to steal. Somebody stole Danielle's stapler.
What the hell, Pacey? I mean, I don't know how we got to this point. I mean, it's up the pole.
Up the pole equals made a mess. Kim thought Mark had made a mess of his job.
Remember, drive to the left.
New Zealand, the angler's paradise, is it true? Fishermen of known integrity and world experience have solemnly affirmed that it is. In contrast to sea fishing, freshwater fishing is regulated by law. The open season for trout begins on the 1st of October and ends on the following 30th of April. Our game, as well as our domestic animals, have all been imported, and they have thrived, to our sorrow be it said. All protection has been removed. You may shoot on sight. For some years now, a special branch of the Department of Internal Affairs has shot each year tens of thousands of red deer, but there are still tens of thousands waiting to be shot.
Americans who have been in New Zealand for some time can assure you newcomers that you will get a warm welcome from the New Zealanders. They have opened their hearts and homes to Americans. We could not ask to be treated with greater kindness and hospitality.
If you want to avoid a head-on crash in New Zealand, drive to the left.
The Americans had been paid, and while there was not that many opportunities to go shopping in the Pacific Islands, in New Zealand there was no end to shops and traders that would gladly take American business. Now, to avoid any complication over the exchange rates and whether or not American money was accepted or not, the New Zealand Bank issued a statement basically saying, here's what the exchange rate is, and all shops have to accept American money.
Exchange rates specified. Reserve Bank Authority. Storekeepers and others supplying goods and services are authorised by the Reserve Bank of New Zealand to accept United States money in payment for purchases made. The recipients must turn over to their banks the money so received. It is an offence against New Zealand law for United States money to be dealt with at any other than the official rates of exchange, which are as follows. 5 cents equals 3 pence, 10 cents 7 pence, 25 cents 1 shilling and 6 pence, 50 cents 3 shillings, 75 cents 4 shillings and 7 pence.
So with pockets full of money and Wellington awaiting them, the Marines disembarked. They had just one day to spend before they would then be heading out to their camp where they'd be spending the next several months, wherever that might be. And they wanted to see as much of Wellington and experience as much as they could. They would try and get themselves a nice meal and a drink, maybe catch a movie, and if they were lucky, maybe meet 1 or 2 New Zealand girls.
We were given liberty this night. I went ashore with Frank Ferris and Arvell Yarborough. We hadn't walked very far when we entered a hotel bar. An Australian soldier with a stiff knee insisted on buying us beer and wine mixes. We survived 1 or 2 of these and really enjoyed his hospitality extended to us by the Australian. Several times we offered to buy him a drink, but he was very insistent that it was his treat. Apparently, he was on his way home from somewhere on the opposite side of the earth, where he had been wounded. We then decided to have dinner and ate delicious steak with lots of butter. We then walked off our full bellies until around 8 p.m. and went to see a movie called Crossroads with William Powell and Hedy Lamarr.
At night time, the Marines returned to their ship to spend one more night on board. And the next morning, they made their way to the railway station. It's a fairly short walk. And they saw the iron horse that was waiting to take them to their new camp.
We had a bit of a chuckle, of course, when we saw the train we were going to get on to, about a quarter the size of the trains back home. And, we weren't too sure whether we were going to make it to Masterton or not. We didn't know where we were going, of course, at that stage. And we didn't stay in Wellington very long. It was only a matter of several days before we managed to go straight aboard the rail and come straight up to Masterton.
How did you decide where the memorial would be, and who did the design and construction?
The memorial had to be in the Solway Showgrounds because that's where they were camped. There's no other place you could put it, really, where it has that kind of meaning. The design was done by me, based on sort of Victorian and Edwardian sort of memorials, and the construction was also done by me. I have a background as a furniture maker, but I also was a carpenter, so a lot of that I had done before, so I felt comfortable that I could do it myself. I also paid for it all myself, so I basically did everything on my own until the end when I really needed help with the actual installation of it. I could not do that on my own.
Trying to find a place to put this memorial was a bit of a challenge. We went all around the showgrounds, but in the end we actually settled on this nice flat grassy area, which is on the right hand side as you go in the main gates, just past all of the main camp buildings.
So you're thinking just out here somewhere?
I think probably just out there looking towards the grandstand, visible for anyone coming along, not in the way of anything.
Yeah. Cool, because the really cool thing is we're talking about being here. There was nothing ever there. There were no buildings ever there. But if we put the memorial right there, that's where a whole bunch of their tents were.
Yep.
So it's the absolute perfect place for it to be.
Sounds really good.
That was easy.
Excellent.
Okay. Got to build it now, but excellent.
Build it.
Now, I was lucky that my background before I went off to university and got my degree in history, I was a furniture maker. So making the formwork, getting all the timber and the board and designing it and putting it all together, and even some of the more complicated stuff that was on the inside to create the negative part of the mold, which is what I'm putting in here, sort of strange shaped boxes, and that all had to come together. This was actually, I enjoyed this part. It was definitely still a challenge, but it was a comfortable challenge. This is a 3D printer. The very, very top part of the obelisk bit is sort of a four-sided pyramid, and I could not work out how I was going to do this. And my friend Paul at the library said, I can 3D print you something. So that's what this is. It saved me a ton of headaches of trying to work out how I could do this. I mean, it worked fantastically. I have to thank him for that, because it saved me so much hassle.
What was the camp in Solway like?
The Solway camp was originally an AMP showgrounds. It was chosen because it was on the outskirts of town. It had water, it had sewage, it had electricity, it had pre-existing buildings that could be utilised, and it had a lot of grassy fields where tents could be pitched. So it was the perfect site for a military camp. This is the main entrance, and the one that the Marines would have used. As you came in, there would have been a sentry, armed sentry, and a flagpole with the stars and stripes on them. You could only get in here by invitation. If you came here and you weren't invited, the sentry would send you on your way. So after coming in the main gate, this is where the first group of tents were in here. Again, there were 2 columns of tents in here, so about a third of the Marines, that's where they camped. That's where all their tents were, 2 columns in this field right here. According to our wartime plan, this is the grandstand, and off to the other side, over here and over here, going in that direction, was the second main area where the Marines had their tents. Now you've got 1,000 young men, late teens, early 20s, who had been away in Guadalcanal for 6 months, in Pearl Harbor and Midway. They'd been away from civilization for a long time. Now, was it really the smartest move in the world to have that many men, put them in a camp in a foreign country right next door to a girls' high school. Now you may think they would have got up to a lot of antics. There was some bad behaviour that happened, but it wasn't the Marines. Apparently the Marine sentries that used to go around with their guns and make sure everything was secure had to spend a lot of their time coming up to this fence and chasing away the girls from the college.
Conditions were pretty good. Once we got settled in and sort of got things organized and everybody got a stove in their tent, and we could keep ourselves a little bit warm in the winter months. Of course, mind you, we could always get out and run, which we usually did in the mornings. First thing in the morning, when we got up, we'd fill the old stove full of wood and coal and so on, toss in a heap of kerosene and throw a match in it, and there'd be a horrible explosion and rings and explosions all over the camp. And then we'd go out for a run. By the time we got back, of course, the forward fire would be roaring and nice and warm, you see.
So back in the camp, things weren't exactly going smoothly. The Marines, although initially excited about coming to New Zealand and being able to camp in Masterton, were taking in their surroundings, taking in the Solway camp, and they weren't particularly happy with how things were actually transpiring.
We were about ready to mutiny, really, at the early stages, just after we'd arrived, and it was so cold and we had no clothes and no warm clothes to put on and everything. Well, I spent most of my time in my eiderdown, but they decided they'd have to stop the mutiny, so they sent a whole big truckload of beer up from Wellington. And everybody was over to this truck and grabbing a case of beer each, and well, we had a high old time for a couple of days.
Now, being back in friendly civilization, when the Marines were out wandering around Masterton, their minds inevitably travelled home, and they began missing their families and getting quite homesick.
While I was gone, my friend Ted Wilhelm was not on leave, but he was walking through the residential section of Masterton with his mind wandering back to his hometown, Farmingdale, Long Island. The neighborhood was very nice, with mostly one-story homes, all trimmed with gardens and trees. I can understand why it would bring some emotion into his thoughts. We had been away from our homes and families since mid-November 1939, and here we were, in a country that had more similarities to home than any other place we had been, up to now, in the middle of February 1943. Going on 4 years is a long time to be away, from age 18 to 22.
So many of New Zealand's young men away fighting overseas. There were several families that had a spare room now. They had an empty bed. And seeing these Marines out and about, many showed their appreciation by inviting these Marines into their home. They could come and billet with them. They could come and have meals with families. And of course, the Marines were thoroughly appreciative of this. You have the opportunity on one side of sharing a tent with a whole bunch of other guys and having whatever food was served, or being in a nice, warm home with a home-cooked meal. They're going to take the latter.
They were great boys. They were only young boys. Most of them were only in their 20s, 23 or 4, And they were lovely young boys. We used to do our best for them. Keith brought one home from town that was leaning very bored against a lamppost one Saturday. When he came in, he joined the Home Guard and, of course, was training for that in case there was trouble here. And coming in from the Home Guard one Saturday night, he saw this fellow leaning against a lamppost, and he looked so dejected and miserable. He said, "Would you like to come home with me for tea?" And he said, "Oh, would I what?" He said. "Oh, I'd love that." So Keith brought him home. And I'll never forget when he walked in the door, he came in as though he was walking on hot bricks, as though he was frightened. But that he might get a blast from the wife, or told he wasn't wanted or something. But we became great friends.
A services club was set up. It's called the Red Cross Services Club. This was a place that Americans could go, as well as uniformed New Zealanders, if you wanted to have a meal, there was entertainment there. They had a piano set up. You could have dances and things there. It was a place where they could go and just relax.
The American Red Cross Service Club will be opening in Masterton in the near future. The club is located in the building recently occupied by the furniture department of Messrs W.E. Cody Limited, Queen Street, near the Fire Brigade Station. The object of the club is to provide recreational facilities and entertainments, and also food prepared and cooked in the American manner for men of the Allied services. The opening of the club will provide the women of Masterton and District with an admirable opportunity of showing their hospitality to visiting servicemen from overseas, and a large band of helpers is required for canteen work as dance hostesses and in other ways.
The people of Masterton that were working at the Red Cross Club went out of their way to provide some familiar culinary items to the visiting soldiers. And if you look at the menu from the time, you can see there was a whole bunch of things there which are familiar to Americans, but for New Zealanders, we'd never ever seen anything like that before, but we learned how to make it so the Americans would be as comfortable as possible. Now, aside from having familiar food, we also brought in a few familiar voices and brought in 3 new staff members specifically for the Red Cross Club.
All hail from New England. Miss Ruth Nesbitt formerly lived in Newton, Massachusetts, and worked in New York as an actuary's assistant for 4 years. Miss Marcella Kelly is a Manchester, Connecticut resident and was a teacher at Hartford. Miss Alta Powell of Hamden, Connecticut, was a reporter for a year on the Hartford Courant. They will assist in the canteen and work with the recreation program on Monday, Thursday, and Sunday nights.
A lot of them are looking for something to drink. And first inquiry, where's the nearest pub? Well, at that stage, Masterton was dry. Masterton was a dry area. There were no pubs here. The nearest pub was the Tarot pub, 10 miles to the east, and the Tarot 10 miles south. Those were the 2 nearest pubs. And of course, the taxi drivers, they reaped a great harvest from them because they had loads of money and they were prepared to pay anything to get out to a pub.
Mastertonians were used to it. No license had been around in Masterton for over 30 years. We fully accepted and understood that you can't buy alcoholic drinks in Masterton. But going back, there was a very strong feeling that alcohol was bad.
Everyone knows that there are people in this community who will suffer horribly unless they are supplied with their wanted liquors. Still, the young men of the town who can absolutely do without stimulants will do well to acquire the temperance habit, for the other habit is a hard taskmaster and carries in its train many horrors.
The incidents that happened with the Yanks coming out and they got a bit pickled in their canteen, they had this American beer, which was pretty strong apparently, and they'd drive on the wrong side of the road. And got out of the goddamn road, you Kiwis. We were driving the creeks with our outfitters. When they got pickled, they come along in these jeeps driving on the right-hand side, you see.
Now, for these Marines coming to Masterton, many were having their first interactions with Māori. Now, Māori are the original inhabitants of New Zealand. They've been here for about 1,000 years, and generally the relationships between Māori and white New Zealanders was pretty good.
Kia ora. I'm a descendant of the Māori people of New Zealand. I'm going to do my pepeha. Ko Aorangi toku maunga, ko Wairarapa toku moana, ko Ruamahanga toku awa, ko Ngāti Hine Waka, me ona hapu karanga, oku hapu, ko Ngāti Kahununu, Ngāti Rangitane, oku iwi. I'm a descendant of a mountain called Aorangi. I'm a descendant of a river called Ruamahanga. I am a descendant of a lake called Wairarapa Moana, and I am a descendant of my hapu and iwi tribes and sub-tribes Ngāti Kahununu, Rangitane and Ngāti Hine Waka, and me ona hapu karanga means many other hapu of this district. I just want to talk about my grandmother, Memory Tawhaiti, who was born here and all her ancestors lived in the Wairarapa and the southern Wairarapa. So from what I know, she had a pen pal who was American. She would have been around about her 20s, maybe a bit younger. She was born in 1925. And as far as I know, she had a pen pal, and it was really friendly conversation, but you know, nothing untoward, and very gentile, I would say.
For many of the Marines, New Zealand was very, very appealing because of some of the recreational activities that were available. Being able to get out and have a bit of fun.
We couldn't have found a better place than New Zealand to have R&R, you know, recruitment and that sort of thing. Oh no, and the thing is that coming to a place like this, and you don't really know how you're going to be accepted, you know, in any particular country. Well, the fact that they spoke English here was a good start. You see, that was a good start. And then when we got to know the people and found out how friendly they were to take you out and take you into their homes and take you out shooting and fishing, and then, I mean, it really dawned on us that we were in heaven here.
Now, while rabbits and other vermin, they're fun to shoot, what the Marines really wanted was to bag themselves a stag. The only place they could get those was up in the Tararua Range to the west. And a few of them perhaps got a little bit too excited when they finally spotted one.
We gave it a good try, walked 300 miles or more. Heavy fog made visibility nil. Saw a stag of approximately 14 points. Laid down a barrage of 200 rounds. Stag reduced to hash. Had canned rations for chow, no venison.
Was the memorial a difficult build? What are some of the tricky things that went into it?
So the first part of the build I actually enjoyed, which was all the woodwork and everything. That was fine. Pouring the concrete was getting a bit trickier, but the main casting was fairly straightforward. The smaller, intricate details, that's when it got trickier.
Taking off all the formwork, you hope that what's inside looks the way you want it to. Luckily, with how it turned out, it did come out quite nicely. The finish was nice and smooth. It looked really good. There were a couple of blemishes, but they were easily fixed later on. Took a bit of effort to remove some of the formwork, and of course you've got to be quite careful removing it. You don't want to do any damage. Although I am using a crowbar here, it's on the inside of this part, and you know, that's never going to be seen. The weather was not particularly cooperative for a lot of this. It was winter, it was cold, and it was raining. And this would have been the same conditions as when the Marines were here. So although it was uncomfortable for me, it would have been far more uncomfortable for them. Coming from Guadalcanal up in the tropics to this, it can't have been nice. These are all the components now. They've actually all come out of their formwork. They look pretty good. Need a bit of polishing. And this is all the formwork. I mean, all that work that I did at the beginning, making these beautiful wooden things, ends up as a pile of rubbish and firewood in the end. You can't reuse them. That was a bit of a shame. This is part of the polishing. I'm using a masonry disc on an angle grinder there, just to polish off the concrete surfaces to make them nice and smooth. Now the lettering are actually individually cast concrete letters. I bought some molds to put the concrete into. There were quite a few of these. Each one, from pouring it to polishing it and everything, took about an hour. So this is the letters forming Masterton. They're still a bit rough. They still need a bit of polishing. And here they are as they will sit in that recess panel. We've now taken that wooden part out, and that's where they're going to sit. So here's the Semper Fidelis, which is going on the obelisk part. There's 4 of those. Here is one of them in situ. Now for the actual plaques, I got in touch with the White Upper Headstones because I wanted really, really good quality. I thought, well, they'll be able to do it. So I sent them designs and everything. They would send ideas back. And what arrived when they delivered it, it was amazing work. We've gone with red granite to match the red of the Marine Corps, the Marine Corps logo one. And this is the large panel describing what the memorial is all about, and that is dedicated to the Third Defense Battalion in black granite. Now, in putting the actual plaques into the recessed panels, I bought the strongest adhesive that I could find and used quite a lot of it. I didn't want these panels falling out or anything. You see, I've used quite a lot there. They're not going anywhere. One of them's already been put in there, so we set them in. They take about a couple of days to set each to make absolutely sure they're really, really strong. So they're set in there. They're not going anywhere. The actual little letters, I used a sort of a mortar just to set them in there. Here we are putting in the Pearl Harbor ones. It worked out mathematically, so all the lettering was spaced out nicely. Then we use a white pigmented mortar to go around it, so the letters are black pigmented and then the mortar around them is white pigmented. So when the two contrast next to each other, the wording should be nice and clear. So we put all the stuff on and we left it fairly raised so that when we come back and we grind it flat, it'll end up looking really, really nice.
Was there a point when you thought you might not be able to complete it on time?
When I was doing the grinding of the white concrete over the letters and the grinder was barely denting it, yeah, at that point I was starting to think I'm going to have to start telling people not to come to the unveiling because there won't be one, at least not on the time that I said it was going to be. And that really, really upset me. That really worried me that I was not going to be able to meet this deadline, but I was struggling to work out how I was going to do it in the time left.
Were the Marines just here for R&R?
No. So originally they were here for R&R because they'd come from Guadalcanal. A lot of them had malaria. They were all exhausted. They needed time to recuperate. But after that, they then had to retrain because the war was not over for them. The war was still going all the while they were here. So they needed to retrain and then get back out into the Pacific War again. Now the Marines by this point had spent a few months living in Masterton and they were starting to interact more and more with the locals. One group in particular was starting to cause some concern, especially with some of the religious groups.
That in view of the moral laxity in the city, which is causing grave concern to the authorities, the Presbytery authorised the moderator to issue a pastoral letter to congregations and that ministers be requested to preach on the need for personal purity and self-control and for a better sense of responsibility on the part of the parents in training and control of their young people.
Now, of course, these young Marines, being young men, of course, are interested in girls, and some of them got girlfriends and going to dances at the Red Cross Club. It was also one of the worst kept secrets that those that were interested in engaging in some horizontal refreshment were able to go down Reynolds Street, and there were several houses down there that you could get said horizontal refreshment. I actually knew a resident who was around at the time. He knew where these houses were, but he wouldn't tell me. For the rest of them, they were interested in relationships, and they developed, quite a few of them developed relationships with Masterton girls.
My sisters got pretty serious. Mum was a bit worried. He went off to Guadalcanal. Not Guadalcanal. He came from Guadalcanal. Wherever they went from here, never heard any more of him, and apparently it was a bit of a massacre there.
Now, there is a persistent story. They were here, they were trying to corrupt Masterton girls. And of course, not being so careful, they're potentially leaving a few time bombs behind when they do go overseas. Now, with the R&R now over
It was time to start thinking about getting fit and getting back into the war again. Now, the best substitute for the Pacific jungle was the Tararua Range, the same place the poor stag met his end. Now, local guides would take these Marines up in there because it's very easy to get lost and there's quite inhospitable conditions, and it is definitely not warm up there. You don't want to get lost. Now, John Pascoe was one of these guides, and he was also involved with some of the training, and he got to take part in some of the exercises with the Marines.
Early next morning, we moved down the valley through thick bush and made base camp in the TT branch of the Whakatakei. We had a time for a scout round and to get a lay of the watershed. The next day we had instruction from various angles and varied this with a round trip along some tops where we were divided into small parties and returned to base on different set courses. Oil bath army compasses made this work easy. After a preliminary skirmish the next day with regular troops, we retired wiser, but on the following morning we took up ambush positions to battle with these regulars who were expected from Paikokariki.
The Marines did get a chance to fire their weapons for real in live fire exercises. And the only really safe place to do this is out on the coast. The notices appeared in the paper essentially saying, stay away, we're going to be using live ammunition. The Marines went out there for a few days and tested their guns that they were going to be needing again when they went back into the Pacific. After the Marines had been here for 5 or 6 months, most people were very, very happy that they were here, but for others, they were starting to outlive their welcome a little bit.
During Wednesday and Thursday last, the traffic conditions were appalling, and it was only by the exercise of extreme care by motorists that accidents did not occur. The use of Queen Street by military lorries and tanks of all types for through traffic and parking purposes is one that should receive immediate attention by the authorities concerned.
Sir, one or two incidents which are going on here and in other parts of our country are a cause of much disquiet amongst our own soldiers, especially men who have returned from overseas. One is the playing of the American national anthem at the local theatres before our own. Certainly play it as a compliment to the Allied forces, the same as in English theatres, where they play the Polish and Canadian anthems, but our own first. Secondly, why is it that an American band is going to lead the forces parade in Wellington on Friday? Surely our own boys are entitled to that honour. After all, Poppy Day is our boys' day.
By September of 1943, the Marines, their time in Masterton was coming to an end. They'd been here for 7 months now. They were well rested. The numbers of the troops had been reinforced, and they now were going to have to go back to the Pacific War. It was time to start getting ready to leave. And as a thank you, they decided to present the people of Masterton with a gift.
The national colors of the United States of America were presented to the mayor, Mr. T. Jordan, for the citizens of Masterton, at an entertainment in the Regent Theater on Sunday, at which the residents of the town and district were the guests of the United States Marine Corps. The flag was proffered as a token of the friendship, respect, and trust placed in the people of Masterton by the Marine Corps.
While the flag was gladly received by the authorities of Masterton, the backstory of the flag being in a condition to be presented was quite interesting.
The colonel called a meeting of all the officers and announced that he was going to donate an American flag to the mayor of Masterton. We had 2 flags available. One was on our main entrance flagpole, and the other needed to be cleaned. He made some despairing remarks about the flag. Butler was standing next to me, and a grin broke out on his face. Colonel Forney spotted him and shouted out that he had wanted this dirty old rag, or something to that effect, cleaned and pressed. He looked at Butler and said, "And you are responsible for it." Butler's grin disappeared. He asked me, "Where the hell can I get a flag cleaned and pressed?" I said take it downtown to the Chinese laundry, which he did. It saved his hide.
Now, the Regent was one of the local theatres where you could go and see a movie, the other being the State. Now, the interesting story about the State is that Marines wanted to be able to go and see a movie. Why not? They've been away in the war. They haven't really been able to see movies. Now, the locals worked this out, and thought, well, the Marines really want to see these movies. We could make some money out of this. So Masterton people would go and buy all of the tickets to the movies. So when the Americans went there, oh, it's sold out. But then, of course, these entrepreneurial Masterton people would say, well, I have some spare tickets if you would like to buy them from me. So the Regent was one of these, and the Regent was chosen as the place where the Marines would say goodbye. This was to be the last place that they would meet up. And the new CO of the Third Defense Battalion, Colonel Forney, summed up their stay in Masterton nicely.
The people of Masterton have cared for our sick, relaxed our battle-worn, and generally rehabilitated the 3rd Defense Battalion. The warmth of their friendship and the extent of their hospitality has been of such unbounded capacity that Masterton is not just a billet, but is now our New Zealand home.
The next day, the Marines made their way back to the train station and started heading south again, over the Rematakas and back to Wellington, where they had first landed exhausted and sick 7 months before. Now they were fit and able and were going to go back to do their part to help push the Japanese back to their homelands. Now, while the 3rd Defense Battalion had stayed in Masterton, they'd made many friends. Some were girlfriends, some were families they'd billeted with, and they wanted to stay in touch, and the way to do this was by post. So the letters would come in. Sometimes it would take several months for a family to hear back from their Marine. But when they did, they were always grateful to hear what they had to say, even though it was heavily censored.
Dear Miss Bull, just a few words from my friends and me to repeat our thanks for your country to us during this brief stay. After having been traveling for some time, your help was especially welcome. You can be further assured that such gestures of goodwill leave us with the most excellent impression of your country and its people. If you should find yourself visiting the States after the war, my home is in Berkeley, California. My wife and I would be glad to hear from you if you should be in the vicinity. Please give my regards to Colin and his brother if you should see them. Sincerely, Charles M. Hopty.
Hello there. I'll bet you thought that we have forgotten you. Well, we haven't, and this is my first real chance that I have had to write to you. I hope that the children and rest of you are in the best of health and all is well. By now, you know that we are in action. Sorry, I can't say where, but I think you may have a good idea. Cheney and Captain Shaw, or Snowy, are well. Both have lost a little weight. We have air raids every night by the Japs, and you can bet that the Marines are going great guns. The other night, a bomb hit about 20 yards from my gun crew in position. We said more prayer in a few seconds than we have said in a long time. Blue now is on the guns in a different battery. Spencer, the old man, was around to see me yesterday. Just think, no drinks, but homemade razor jack. As ever, Eddie.
For several months, these letters would go backwards and forwards, but unfortunately, in some cases, the letters would stop, meaning their Marine hadn't made it. They were sent to Bougainville in the Solomon Islands after they left New Zealand. This was another really horrible place to have to fight a war against an extremely determined enemy. And they were there until June of 1944. The 3rd Defense Battalion was deactivated in December of 1944, and the men were then dispersed into other theatres of the war. From the time that the Marines left Masterton till the end of the war, the newspapers, which had originally had the Roll of Honour listing the New Zealanders that were dying overseas, now included the Marine Corps that were dying overseas that had a connection to New Zealand. And unfortunately, as the war progressed, more and more of the names of these young Americans were appearing in the death notices of New Zealand papers.
With the memorial components completed, was the next step any easier?
It was in the sense that I had help from a very skilled friend of mine, Alistair, who also works at council with me, who's also a tradesman. There's no way I could have installed it on my own. But with him there and the skills that he had, it went pretty smoothly. It was actually not as difficult as I thought it would be. We made a great team and we did a really good job.
Now, my friend Alistair told me, said if you're wanting to do concrete grinding, get yourself a diamond cutter and a decent grinder, which I did, and it made all the difference.
See what we can do this way. Again. Oh, what's it? A bit more. Okay. Right. I only hear the brake word. Ready? Yep. Yep. Yeah, we haven't even hit pivot point yet. Yep. Yep, I've got. Yep, beautiful. Coming down. Hang on. Right. Beautiful. It's my brain door. Good. Well, you must hit most of the weight because I've got shit all. Right. Yeah. 1, 2, 3, up.
So even though no one will see it, we've got turquoise from America, which will be in it. So at least the heart of it is American.
Beautiful. Right, close in at the top as we can, because that's where all the weight's going to be. 1, 2, 3, up. We might touch each other inappropriately, but that's all right. So we'll be going. Yep. I just want to pivot slightly. There we go. Beautiful. That's exactly what I planned.
Well done.
Well done.
After a year of work, the day of the unveiling had arrived. How did you feel going into that?
A bit apprehensive. I was proud of what I had done. I thought it was brilliant looking. memorial, but would the families like it? Because after all, this is a memorial to their fathers, to their grandfathers. Would they like what I did? Would they like my tribute to them? I really, really hoped so.
When the United States was attacked on the 7th of December 1941 in Pearl Harbor, New Zealand had been at war for 2 years. We had been in places like Greece and Crete, and we were in Africa. And at that time, with Japan entering the war on the side of the Axis, that changed the shape of the global conflict and threatened the entire world. It was the United States' entry through the attack on Pearl Harbor that changed the game. A game that resulted in, just in the Pacific, 23,160 US Marines being killed.
For some of those Marines, Masterton was very probably their last friendly port of call, somewhere where they could relax and feel human again. Some probably never managed to make it home, which makes today's ceremony even more poignant.
It is a true honor to stand before you today, representing not only the U.S.M.C, but also the United States Marine Corps, and to share this moment with our friends and allies here in beautiful Masterton, New Zealand. From World War II, which we've talked about, to today, the United States and New Zealand have stood side by side in defense of peace and of freedom. As the spirit of cooperation between our nations continues to grow, it is a privilege to be a part of that enduring partnership that we've had from the past that we can see today. As Marines, we are trained to any challenge, to face any adversity with courage and resolve. It is not only our commitment to our nations that binds us, but our commitment to each other as brothers and sisters. To the people of New Zealand, to the people of Masterton, I want to say thank you for your warm hospitality, both in the past, but also now and in the present. To my fellow Marines, thank you for your dedication and sacrifice. Together, we all uphold the values of honor, courage, and commitment. And together, we will continue to build a safer and more secure world. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Semper Fi.
This is not a moment for celebration. Memorials are not made for happy reasons. For months, this was a construction project for me, but these last few weeks, the reality has set in. This is not just another building project. The 3,000 pounds of concrete and granite is a link, a tribute to men who made the ultimate sacrifice and to those that lived long and prosperous lives but will be forever scarred by their experiences. They all did their part, and they were the reason that we in New Zealand were able to breathe easy at night. Future generations will now be able to come here to this place and know who these men were, where they had been, and that they did their part to keep our country safe in the darkest days of World War II.
Which way are we going? Go that way. Okay.
There it is.
Well, it was quite an emotional day, and I didn't think it would be emotional because I had previously met my father once before when I went to the States, particularly to find him. But when I saw that this was happening, I thought, yes, I want to be part of it. And to see the memorial and to see and listen to the speeches and to think that the boys that came over here were the same age as my grandsons, my two grandsons, and for them to be here and hear those things as well was quite good. The emotional part comes from thinking, wow, what a big sacrifice it was for them. I suppose the people of Masterton probably thought the same things as well, and the fact that they were able to give a house, give a home, and give some love to those guys was great.
It's beautiful, work of art.
proud. I'm so proud of my dad. You know, he gave up, you know, his life was fighting, and what a life they had, those poor men, you know. I think we forget the sacrifices they made for us. Yeah, and to have him, a plaque made in the remembrance of him and all the other men, just makes you so proud, fills your heart with joy. Dad, I wish you were here.
Yeah, I can't tell you, I don't have the geography of that little area.
Tears in my eyes, yeah.
It's been an emotional day, but certainly well worth it. It was, I mean, there was some apprehension coming into it. I was 80% excited coming into it, and 20%, it's a big deal. And when I started to see how many people were coming into the hall, how many people were sitting down and waiting, for me to do my thing and everyone else to do their speeches, like this is a big deal. This is a big event. It's bigger than I thought it would be. More people have turned up than I expected, for sure.
5 years after I first went to that site in Solway to have a look around and see whether we could find any remnants of these Marine Corps, I went back to see how it had changed, and also to visit with someone that I knew who actually lives there and get their perspective on what it was like living on the site where these Marines lived.
Hello.
Nice to meet you.
You too.
Come in.
Thank you.
Yes, we moved here in 2022, mainly because we had a military background and we had an association with the barracks. I had an auntie, my father's sister actually, who married a US Marine in 1944 and got shipped off on a US Navy ship to America in 1945. And we'd spent time in the New Zealand military ourselves, my husband and I, so we've quite associated with the barracks. So we thought it was quite ironic that we ended up here building a home for retirement.
I recently went overseas and an opportunity was there to visit Pearl Harbor. Going across to the USS Arizona was a very moving experience, and certainly one that I will take with me for the rest of my life.
There's now a memorial where these men were camped, and people will remember that they were here. How do you feel having accomplished that?
Before I did any of this, no one here knew that the Marines were here. No one knew that there was over 1,000 of them that came to stay here, that had spent 6 months in Guadalcanal, that had been at Midway when it was attacked, that had been at Pearl Harbor when it was attacked. But now there is a permanent memorial in Solway Showgrounds to these men. And it makes me extremely proud that I have been the one to do that for them.
Mawhai o na ngalo e la o pele le tamafutanga ua motusia e tinga tele ua e alu ai tua unei ua e sola i tiai matou nei tangi a te oe whaamanga lo so se You always walk beside me in my dreams. It burdens me to wake up from my sleep. Never forget you. You'll always have a place inside my heart. Your memories will guide me in the dark. You are never forgotten. Te koe